What happens when the people you love betray you? When the promises they made, years of devotion, loyalty, and partnership, turn out to be nothing more than lies? What do you do when your trust is shattered and the very foundation of your family crumbles beneath you? This isn't just some hypothetical question. It's the painful reality that Janelle, Mary, Cody, Robin, and Christine are living right now. The Brown family, once built on shared dreams and commitment, is now unraveling. Behind closed doors, betrayal has cut deeper than we ever imagined. And at the heart of it all, financial deceit, broken promises, and a deep emotional rift that no one saw coming. Janelle and Mary are struggling to pick up the pieces, while Cody and Robin's actions have left them questioning everything they thought they knew. It's a fight for trust, for justice, and most importantly, for a future where they're no longer shackled by the lies of the past. So, what happens next? Let's dive into the drama and uncover the truth that's been hiding in plain sight. I'm Olivia, and welcome back to TLC's Sister Wives Secrets. Don't forget to subscribe and let me know in the comments, do you think there's any coming back from this betrayal? Let's take a step back and look at what really set this whole disaster in motion: the betrayal of trust and the financial mismanagement by Cody and Robin. It wasn't just a slip-up or a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate, calculated move to keep the rest of the family in the dark. While Cody and Robin were busy building their own life, the rest of the Brown family was left struggling, unaware that the financial stability they once had was being drained away. Janelle, in particular, was hit hard. She had always prided herself on being a pillar in the family, steady, reliable, and fiercely loyal. She had worked side by side with Cody to build their shared future. But then, everything started to feel off. Money wasn't being managed the way it used to be. There were transfers of funds, large sums of money that seemed to be disappearing into thin air, all in the name of personal expenses. And yet, Cody and Robin kept everything hush-hush, like it was some kind of secret. This wasn't just poor financial planning, it was manipulation. For Janelle, the emotional impact of being kept in the dark about something as important as finances was devastating. She had trusted Cody. She had made sacrifices, followed his lead, and believed in their vision for the future. So when she began to piece together the reality that Cody and Robin were using family resources to fund their own desires, the sense of betrayal was overwhelming. Every promise they made, every word that came out of their mouths about fairness and unity felt like a lie. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the trust that had been broken in the most painful way possible. Mary, too, wasn't immune to the sting of betrayal. As one of Cody's original wives, she had believed in the family structure. But now, as she saw the secrecy unfold before her eyes, she couldn't help but feel completely manipulated. It wasn't just about the finances. It was about the complete lack of respect for the other wives and their place in the family. There was no transparency, no communication, just secrecy. And that left Mary feeling not only betrayed, but also insignificant. What made the situation even worse was the difference in reactions between Cody and Janelle. While Janelle's frustration grew by the day, Cody remained eerily calm, almost as if he had already accepted the consequences of his actions. Instead of stepping up to take responsibility for his decisions, Cody seemed more interested in maintaining control of the narrative, convincing everyone that his choices were justified and that they were just too sensitive to understand. Janelle's frustration, on the other hand, continued to build. It was hard for her to understand how Cody could act so nonchalant, so indifferent to the damage he was causing. His calm demeanor felt like a slap in the face to her, as if he didn't care about how deeply he was hurting her and the other wives. To her, this was a battle for justice, a fight to make sure the truth came out, no matter how much Cody and Robin tried to hide it. Meanwhile, Mary was feeling like an outsider in her own family. She had spent years trying to trust Cody, trying to trust the system they had built. But now, she couldn't help but feel like a pawn in a game she never wanted to play. It was as though she and Janelle were being manipulated, kept in the dark and sidelined, while Cody and Robin focused solely on their own interests. The secrecy and the lies began to erode the very foundation of the family. Trust, once the cornerstone of their relationships, had been shattered. What was supposed to be a family based on shared values had turned into a system of manipulation and exploitation, and the emotional toll was starting to show in every interaction. Janelle and Mary weren't just angry, they were hurt, disappointed, and disillusioned by the very people they had supported for years. And the worst part? They knew they couldn't go back to the way things were. The damage had been done, and now they had to face the reality of what their family had become. As the reality of the financial deceit settled in, things started to escalate between Cody, Robin, and the other wives. The trust that was once so vital to their relationships began to unravel, and with it came a deep sense of emotional strain. It wasn't just the money at this point, it was the way Cody and Robin's actions had affected the whole family dynamic. Janelle, especially, felt like she was on the edge of a breaking point. Janelle had always been the strong, steady one. She had fought for the family, made sacrifices, and put in the hard work. But now, it seemed like everything she had worked for was being swept away, and there was no accountability from Cody or Robin. She had no answers, just silence. This wasn't the life she signed up for, and it was starting to become clear that her future in the family was at risk. But what really hurt was the fact that Cody seemed so detached from the damage he was causing. He had spent so much time trying to maintain this idealized image of himself as the man of the house, as the head of the family, that he completely ignored the cracks forming beneath the surface. Cody was more interested in keeping up appearances than in doing the hard work of fixing the mess he had made. He didn't seem to care about Janelle's growing frustration or Mary's sense of betrayal. His calmness, his refusal to acknowledge the depth of the problem, made Janelle feel even more isolated. For Janelle, it wasn't just about being angry anymore, it was about survival. She had spent years trying to navigate this complicated polygamous family structure, but now she was starting to question whether this was the life she really wanted. She knew she had to make a change. That's when she started seriously considering her options outside of Cody's world. The idea of financial independence, of controlling her own future, became more and more appealing. On the other hand, Robin seemed to be basking in the chaos of the situation. It was as if she was perfectly content with keeping the status quo, ignoring the growing tension, and focusing on her own comfort. She had been able to manipulate Cody into prioritizing her needs and desires, and now, in the wake of all the financial drama, she seemed to be trying to hold on to that control at all costs. She continued to push the idea that everything was fine, that they were a family, but in reality, Robin knew how to use her position to her advantage. The emotional toll on Janelle and Mary was impossible to ignore. Janelle was fed up, but Mary was falling apart. While Janelle was planning her escape, Mary felt trapped in a toxic situation. She had been in this family for years, and now she felt like she didn't even know who to trust anymore. The secrecy, the lies, and the manipulation were slowly suffocating her, and she wasn't sure how much longer she could handle it. Every time Janelle tried to get answers from Cody, she was met with more excuses, more stonewalling. Every time Mary tried to speak her truth, she was dismissed. And all the while, Cody and Robin continued on as if nothing was wrong. For Janelle and Mary, the emotional weight of being ignored and manipulated had become unbearable. What made matters worse was the realization that this wasn't just about financial deceit anymore. It was about a deeper, more insidious betrayal of the entire family. Trust had been shattered, and once that's gone, it's almost impossible to get it back. For Janelle and Mary, this wasn't just about trying to get their fair share of resources. It was about their sense of self-worth. They had spent years being loyal to Cody and the family, but now they realized that loyalty had been exploited. It was clear now. This was not just a financial issue. This was a question of loyalty, respect, and the emotional devastation caused by years of broken promises. And for Janelle and Mary, the path forward wasn't just about confronting the finances. It was about taking back control of their lives, their happiness, and their futures. It was a wake-up call, a realization that they had been living under the shadow of Cody and Robin's deceit for far too long, and it was time to break free. By now, the emotional and psychological toll on Janelle and Mary had reached its breaking point. But the real turning point came when Janelle, no longer willing to be silenced or manipulated, started to take real action. This was the moment when she finally realized that if she didn't stand up for herself and take control of her own future, no one else would. She had spent years in this family, trying to make the best of a complicated and dysfunctional situation, but the constant betrayal, especially regarding finances, had completely shattered her sense of trust. She was done waiting for Cody or Robin to make things right. Janelle's frustration wasn't just about the lack of transparency or fairness anymore. It was about how the entire family had been treated as pawns in Cody and Robin's scheme. As Janelle began to come to terms with the reality of her situation, her anger was no longer just aimed at the financial manipulation. It was aimed at the whole dynamic of the family, the toxic culture that had been fostered by Cody's leadership. He had repeatedly promised equality, fairness, and unity, but those were just empty words. Behind the closed doors of the family, it was clear that Cody and Robin were building their own world at the expense of everyone else. For Janelle, it became apparent that she had been used as much as Mary had, only with different tactics. While Mary struggled with the emotional strain of feeling neglected and isolated, Janelle was forced to confront the cold truth that Cody had emotionally abandoned her. Even as the family splintered, Cody's focus remained on his relationship with Robin, leaving Janelle and the others in the dust. It was as though Janelle had always been the backup, never truly valued, and she had spent too many years accepting this role. And then there was Mary, who was struggling in her own right. Unlike Janelle, Mary had a more passive approach to her discontent. She had quietly lived with the hurt, but now she was starting to see just how much of her life had been wasted under Cody's control. Her bitterness was palpable. The secretive financial dealings, the dismissiveness, the emotional neglect. Mary was suffocating under the weight of it all. Her thoughts were all over the place as she began to question whether this was the life she wanted to continue living. But what really made Mary's situation worse was her own sense of guilt. For years, she had been the one who felt like she was doing something wrong if she wasn't completely loyal to Cody. She had invested so much of herself into the idea of the family, into the idea of being a good wife, that she had allowed herself to be manipulated. Now, as her eyes were opening to the truth, she was filled with anger, not just at Cody and Robin, but at herself for not seeing the signs sooner. Janelle, on the other hand, wasn't wasting any more time. She started to think about her next steps and her future. The idea of financial independence was becoming more than just a distant dream. It was her lifeline. She could see that by staying in the marriage, staying in the family dynamic, she was only going to continue to be controlled, ignored, and undervalued. She began seeking out opportunities to take charge of her own life, whether that meant starting her own business, focusing on her wellness, or making connections with people outside the family. This wasn't just about finances. It was about reclaiming her own identity. For Janelle, this was her chance to escape the toxic grip that Cody and Robin had on her life. It was time to focus on herself, her growth, and her well-being. Cody's behavior no longer had the power to define her. Janelle had been the steady one, the one who always played by the rules, but now she was ready to break free and take control. It was about time for her to step into her own power. And while Mary was still trapped in the emotional web that had been spun around her, Janelle was beginning to see a brighter future, one where she could be her own person, outside of Cody's shadow. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was the only way she could rebuild her life with honesty, with integrity, and with her own voice at the forefront. At the heart of this conflict was the question of trust. Cody had broken it with his actions, and in the wake of that betrayal, both Janelle and Mary were forced to rebuild their own identities and their own sense of self-worth. The emotional scars left by the years of deceit would take time to heal, but one thing was clear. Janelle and Mary were ready to start a new chapter, one that didn't revolve around Cody's control or Robin's manipulation, and that was a powerful realization in itself. As the tension continued to build, the cracks within the family were becoming more and more impossible to ignore. For Janelle, the turning point wasn't just about confronting the lies or the money. It was about reclaiming her sense of self-worth. She had spent years supporting Cody, helping to raise a family that was supposed to thrive on mutual respect and fairness. But instead, she had been sidelined while Cody and Robin took the spotlight. And the more Janelle thought about it, the angrier she became. This wasn't just financial mismanagement. It was an emotional betrayal that had slowly eaten away at her confidence and trust. Janelle's determination to take back control of her life only intensified as she started to see how far Cody and Robin were willing to go to protect their own interests. The secretive behavior regarding money was just the tip of the iceberg. It was clear that Cody had been playing a dangerous game, balancing the needs of his wives while secretly prioritizing his own desires, often at the expense of the others. And this wasn't just about money, it was about power. Cody and Robin had been manipulating the family dynamic, slowly isolating themselves from the others, while they continued to build their own ideal life together. And let's not forget about Mary, who had been desperately trying to hold it all together. She was no longer willing to keep pretending everything was fine. Her emotional exhaustion had reached a breaking point. The toll that years of deception and neglect had taken on her wasn't something she could just ignore. Yet she felt paralyzed by the years of loyalty she had shown to Cody. She had sacrificed so much, always telling herself it would get better, that things would work out. But now, as the truth came to light, it was clear that her faith in the family and in Cody had been misplaced. At the same time, Christine's departure from the family marked a new beginning. For so long, she had been the emotional anchor in the family, the one who always seemed to have a solution or a calm word in the storm. But once she left, it created a ripple effect. It wasn't just about the loss of another wife. It was about the end of an era. With Christine gone, Janelle and Mary were left to pick up the pieces, figuring out their own way forward in a family that was no longer as cohesive as it once seemed. Janelle, now more than ever, realized that her own path forward lay outside the constraints of Cody's world. She didn't need his approval or his validation anymore. For the first time, she was ready to build something of her own. A life that was hers to control, no longer subject to Cody's whims. And for Mary, while it would take longer to heal, the realization that she too had been manipulated and had allowed it for far too long was the first step toward reclaiming her voice and her power. It wasn't going to be easy, and it certainly wasn't going to happen overnight. But the emotional toll these years of deception and betrayal had taken on both Janelle and Mary was undeniable. They had both given so much to this family, and now it was time to reclaim their power and their futures on their own terms. Cody and Robin might have thought they could control the narrative, but the truth was finally coming out. And Janelle and Mary were ready to take their stand. As the tension finally reached its breaking point, there was an undeniable shift in the energy of the family. The cracks had deepened, and there was no pretending anymore. For Cody and Robin, their carefully crafted narrative was beginning to crumble. They had spent so long building a life based on their own version of reality, one where they were in control, where they manipulated the system to suit their needs. But now the truth was out. The betrayal, the secrecy, the financial mismanagement, it couldn't be swept under the rug any longer. The walls of their fortress were crumbling, and with it, the illusion of a united family. Janelle, more determined than ever, made a bold decision. She was going to take control of her own life. She was tired of being a pawn in Cody and Robin's game. The financial betrayal was just one piece of a much bigger picture. One where she had been living in a relationship that no longer served her. She had spent years supporting a family dynamic that was supposed to be based on fairness and respect. But instead, she had been left in the dark, manipulated and taken advantage of. And for what? For Cody to enrich himself and build a life with Robin while leaving the other wives struggling? No, Janelle wasn't having it anymore. The truth was, Janelle had been so much more than just Cody's wife. She had been the backbone of the family. She had sacrificed so much for him and the family only to be met with disappointment and betrayal. It had taken time, but the anger was finally bubbling to the surface. Janelle was no longer the passive, loyal wife who would forgive Cody's broken promises. She had grown stronger, more independent, and more willing to fight for herself. Meanwhile, Mary, though still struggling to find her footing, was beginning to see the light. It was painful, but she could no longer deny that she had been emotionally manipulated. Years of loyalty, of silence, of trying to be the perfect wife, all of it had been for nothing. She had invested her heart into a family that had ultimately taken more from her than it gave. But Mary wasn't the same woman she had been when she first entered into this relationship. She had her own voice now, and it was time for her to use it. As Janelle and Mary began to break free from the emotional chains Cody had wrapped around them, it became clear that the family dynamic was never going to be the same again. The power imbalance, which had been so subtle for so long, was now glaring. Cody and Robin might have tried to spin their narrative, but the truth was too loud to ignore. And as the lies unraveled, the other wives, the ones who had been kept in the dark, the ones who had been lied to, began to regain their voices. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about the emotional toll these years of manipulation and betrayal had taken on Janelle, Mary, and the entire family. Cody had thought he could control everything, that he could isolate himself with Robin while leaving everyone else in the shadows. But what he didn't expect was for Janelle and Mary to finally say, "Enough." The emotional fallout from years of deceit was real, and now it was time to face the consequences. The question was, would Cody and Robin ever truly understand the damage they had caused? Would they see the impact their selfishness had on the people who had once loved them? Or were they too far gone in their own bubble of entitlement and deception? One thing was clear. The family was never going to be the same. And as Janelle and Mary began to find their own paths forward, it was hard not to wonder, who would be left standing at the end of this emotional and financial war? By this point, the truth had begun to seep into every corner of the Brown family's life, and the emotional toll was impossible to ignore. For Janelle, the emotional and psychological strain was intense, but it also marked the beginning of a personal transformation. She had spent so many years putting others first, sacrificing her own happiness for the sake of the family. But now she was turning that energy inward. She was actively seeking ways to empower herself, taking control of her life in a way she never had before. Janelle's decision to launch her own business was more than just a professional move. It was an act of defiance against the life she had lived for so long. She was no longer dependent on Cody or anyone else. It was her chance to rebuild her identity and reclaim her sense of self-worth. The financial betrayal had shattered her trust in Cody, but it also opened her eyes to the possibilities of a life beyond the constraints of her marriage. She no longer wanted to be held back by a man who had taken so much from her. Meanwhile, Christine's departure from the family became a glimmer of hope, a symbol of what was possible when you choose your own happiness over the toxic dynamics of a broken family. Christine had always been the one who spoke up, the one who didn't tolerate Cody's nonsense. And now, as she embraced her newfound freedom, it felt like a breath of fresh air for the audience watching. Christine's decision to move on gave hope to the others, showing that there was a way out, a way to reclaim personal autonomy even in the face of years of emotional manipulation. As the season came to a close, the unresolved issues between Cody, Robin, and the ex-wives hung in the air, leaving fans wondering what would come next. Would there be healing? Or would the family's dysfunction continue to spiral out of control? One thing was certain: the emotional and financial fallout would reverberate for a long time to come.